So, but here's the thing: I'm fine with whatever you got, but I wanted to. I'm fine with whatever you want to do on that, and we can make this opening. But I've got a couple of sources from today on the inflationary thing. That sounds like I better get. Okay.
Okay.
Give me 30. Give me 10 seconds.
Yep.
All right, my friend.
And I also want to talk about like demographics and how I get demographics, inflation, land access, and the fallacy of the feed the world narrative. How's that for in the discussion?
Demographics, inflation, and what was the other one? Land access.
Land access for a new generation.
And then fallacy of feed the world.
Fallacy of feeding the world.
You're playing into my sweet spot. We're good.
All right. Well, Damian Mason, welcome to Ranching Reboot. It's good to have you here. Got maybe a little bit of a short episode today because we are both short on time. So let's dive into it. Give us the elevator speech. Give us your elevator speech.
I don't have an elevator speech. People always say that, especially in ag. I don't like talking to people on elevators, nor do people like to be talked to on elevators. So I always found it funny. Give us your elevator speech. Like my elevator speech is, I awkwardly look at the number on the little thing when it tells you what floor you're getting to, so that I get to the correct floor. If you mean give you 20 seconds about Damian Mason, I'm a farm boy from Indiana, was raised on a dairy farm, conventional, normal dairy farm of its era. Would now look very quaint and antiquated, frankly, because things have evolved so much with automation and consolidation in the dairy industry. But we milked 60 cows, farmed about 500 or 600 acres. Most of it was rented. My grandfather came to this country and milked cows as a herdsman. So I'm a second generation and very much that hardworking farm kid background. Went to Purdue, have a degree in agricultural economics, worked in corporate America for a couple of years, quit my job and pursued political comedy, turned political comedy into my business starting in 1994. Ran with that pretty strong until the early mid 2000s, and then made the big switch to becoming, instead of a political comedy guy, being an ag guy who's funny. And then increasingly over the time, people come up and say, hey, you're really funny, but you actually know stuff about this. Well, yeah, I know stuff about this. I read the Wall Street every day. I travel. I've created my own business. So they said, can you make more business points? So over the years, I sort of became known as the keynote speaker for business and agriculture. That's what we do a lot of. I speak at conferences. I've written 2 books. If you're listening and not viewing, you can look over my shoulders here. There are 2 of my most recent books, Do Business Better, which is geared to small biz and self-employed entrepreneur types. Another book called Food Fear, which probably is mistitled. It should just be called The Past, Present, and Future of American Agriculture. So that's what those are all about. I produce the Business of Agriculture podcast. I have been doing that for over 5 years. I have a tremendous following and listenership and even sponsors there. And I also, on the side, I produce content for a group called Extreme Ag, which is a group of forward-thinking, mostly row crop, broad acre, large acreage farmers, and we do a lot of product trials, and we produce content about what the trials are, the practices, the new methods we're doing, and all that. So I keep pretty busy in ag, and I travel all over. I live half the time at my farm in Indiana, and I live half the time in Arizona because I hate winter. And I'm coming to you from my winter home right now in Arizona, which is actually my winter office. People always get that wrong, by the way, Brian. Oh, man, you go out there to Arizona for the winter. You missed a bad winter. And my wife says, do these people not keep up with your social media feed? You were in Des Moines and Mankato, Minnesota. Then from there, you were in Saskatoon. How the hell do they think you've missed out on any winter? I'm like, yeah, I do speaking engagements at business meetings for ag, which of course takes me all over to the cold country.
And, you know, us ag producers, we like to have a lot of meetings when it's, you know, cold and crappy out. So we're not feeling the pressure to be outside working, and we don't mind being cooped up in a conference room or an office.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of audiences, when you say you speak at ag conferences, because again, I live half the year in Arizona out here, they think you speak at ag conferences, you go and do farmer meetings. I'd say that 1/5 of my audiences are farmers or ranchers, because there's so much ancillary industry, as you know, pharmaceutical, calf medicine, biological crop inputs, fertilizer, feed, seed, finance, crop insurance, machinery. I mean, processing, food processing, distribution. So I get around the table of agriculture pretty well, as you might say, from cranberries to, you know, ethanol.
Very cool. Very cool. So you've probably seen a lot of the corporatization and centralization of ag happen over your career.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Being a political comedian, Brian, means to be, I always say, you start with observation. I was an observant kid. I've been paying attention for a long time. You know, I used to read like Time magazine or watch media even when I was a kid. And so I've been doing this for a long while, whether it's about current events, political stuff, or agriculture, the industry that you and I both work in and were raised around. There's this perception that, oh God, things are so different today than they've always been. Well, yeah, technologically, yes. Right now, a guy is doing Twitter in a tractor that's driving itself and doing the work that 4 tractors would have been required to do 60 years ago. Okay, that's change, yes. But, you know, like consolidation, you used the word corporatization. That's not something that's new today. It's not something that's new last year. You know, in my book, I talk about it. I think the number is about 8 million. It's 6.5 or 8 million. I can look it up right now, and I will when we have a pause here. But I talk about consolidation because this whole thing of, well, you know, them great big corporate farmers now didn't used to be that way. Well, when we've been getting bigger since like the Pilgrims got off the boat, you know, you got better at growing corn. So you did 2 acres and all of a sudden you could do 20 acres. And then the guy down the road said, I'm shitty at growing corn. So you know what, you grow corn on my field and I'll go over here and work in the place with the paddle wheel where they grind the corn. That's kind of how the evolution of all of society has happened. So have I witnessed the corporatization or consolidation? I think might be a more accurate thing. Yeah, but then we all have, and it's been going on for a long time. It's lamented. It is complained about. It is resented, but I'm not sure that it's anything new. You know, we had like 8 million farms in America in the 1930s, and today there are 2 million farms. It didn't happen because some evil corporate titan came around and said, sell me your farm ground or I'm going to sick my private security guards on you. It happened because a lot of people are out there not doing very well, right? You know, there's nostalgia for the old days, Brian. It's like, okay, have you read The Grapes of Wrath? Have you studied what the farm economics of the 1930s looked like? So to say that we lost a whole bunch of farms during that time because of some evil, and I'm not in any way like, oh, Mr. Rah corporate. I'm just saying it's kind of happened from an evolution of economics, and some of it I'm not sure that you would argue against. I talk about that in my book as well. When you say the good old days, you know, the cows had brucellosis. The child infant mortality rate in rural America 50, 70 years ago was atrocious. I mean, almost enough to make you cry. So let's not pretend that the good old days were always so good. And I guess I'll close it out on this, and we can get back to the corporate part and the economics, which is one of my strong suits. My father told you was a herdsman's son. He broke his arm when he was an 8-year-old boy. And got a compound fracture. Compound fracture, poor kid out in rural America. You know, your dad's a herdsman milking cows for people. You ain't got a lot of money. This is before penicillin. It's the 1930s. They stuck a cast on his arm and got gangrene. They amputated it at the elbow. Came in the next day, still smelled gangrene. The doctor smelled the gangrene and said, shit, Harold, we didn't get it all. And then went and cut his arm off a second time. I used that barbaric illustration about my father's little boy to point out my dad didn't go on and on about how good the good old days were. When you think of some of the things that happened back in that era, we still had immigrants doing the labor. They were still poor, and you're talking about the 1930s here. And to boot, we had kids that got a broken arm and all of a sudden lost their arm and spent 70 years without a left arm on account of it. So let's be careful about how today things are terrible and somehow things were good back then, I guess is the illustration I'd like to use.
And I totally respect that. You know, we have made some very significant technological advances, you know, but some of those I kind of question. You know, a great example of, you know, getting an arm injury and having to have amputations. Would that have happened in 1950 and 1980 in 2010? Yeah, probably not, because we know more things. We have better access to information. We have better access to medical care. But what we also have access to is we also have access to a lot of things that we don't understand, which I'm thinking of like some of these chemical weapons that we've been using to farm with, you know, insecticides, herbicides, pesticides over the years. And we can go back like DDT. We remember DDT, right? We had to quit using DDT because we almost extincted the California condor. It was hurting bald eagles. And it seems like we could have learned a lesson there about mass use of pesticides and herbicides and what they did down the food, you know, on down the food chain. And that was a tangent I really didn't intend to chase. So going
well, you told me we were going before you hit the record button. You said we're going to cover demographics, inflation, land access, and the fallacy feed the world. And then you went off on DDT, and you and I are at absolute polar opposite ends on that one, because I can point out the National Science Foundation, or National Academy of Sciences, as it were, stated at one point that they believe that DDT, an overused insecticide, to your point, overused insecticide that did have it was amazingly effective, was why it was so overused, and it was incredibly affordable. National Academy of Sciences says that worldwide they think that DDT saved 500 million lives from things like dengue and malaria. DDT was not banned. In fact, I've got a whole episode of the Business of Agriculture podcast devoted to the DDT comparison to climate change and the hysteria, crisis, perpetuation that is not really based in science or fact. So did DDT have some harmful effects? Well, first off, we overused it. And same with glyphosate. You could say that. I mean, you're probably on the same page as that. Glyphosate, tremendously effective, but way overused. It's the world's most used herbicide. Why? It's cheap and it's generally effective. It's been overused. Now we have all sorts of glyphosate tolerant, plants, weeds. But on the DDT front, here's the tough part. They used the eagle. The activist groups used the eagle, the American symbol, and said that eagles are going to go extinct because of DDT, and that actually wasn't really true. Big thing is that's a kind of a bigger thing here, Brian, about activism versus science and reality. And this would be, of all things, a time to talk about that with all the COVID and whatnot, and some of the findings that we're going with there. But we don't need to get into that whole ship. Big thing I think you're pointing out there is we've got progress. And you're going to say probably maybe what I think maybe you're saying there is progress always good, or do we deem things advances that also might have a few some of the advances come along with a negative?
I'll tie it in. Okay. So as farms get bigger, corporate highs, and we have these large for-profit corporations that fund research projects, fund research centers at universities, that fund lobbyists, that take out ads in print magazines and on TV, talking about how great the chemicals they're developing are for the world. And the problem I get to is corporations are run basically to generate a profit.
Yep.
And that's their mission. And everything else comes secondary to that. Environmental effects, human effects, everything kind of comes secondary to that the holy altar of corporate profits. And I'm not saying that's evil, because we need a certain amount of that, to maybe drive progress in the world, right? But when we get to a point where, it's to these companies' benefit, they do the math and they say, hey, yeah, there's some negative effects from this, but we can make billions of dollars before anybody finds out about it. And I don't want to say anything like, anything specific. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Do I understand what you're saying? I have been yelled at for 3 years that I'm anti-science by people that lean a certain way politically because of my stance against the COVID crusaders that want to shut down the economy, or worse yet, some of them, the hard left, started saying that we should have government agents go door to door and forcibly vaccinate these people who are too ignorant to understand science. And I said, first off, do you realize how similar you are to very, very bad things that have happened in the last couple hundred years historically? Do you have any comprehension of how you just sounded like the Nazi forces, etc., the Gestapo, for God's sakes, the brown shirts? But anyway,
before that, they were screaming that Trump was a Nazi, Trump was a Nazi, Trump was a Nazi, and then, COVID happens. Oh, now we need to go door to door, give everybody vaccines. Like, you don't understand what you sound like right now.
No, they don't know history. So anyway, to that point, Pfizer's, I think the number is 28 billion that they made just off of the second round of the booster. So, and Pfizer also has pushed now for protections and has it, so that they cannot be sued for anything, any side effects that should come about because of this. So what you're saying, and this is probably your listeners saying, what the hell's happened here, Damian? You just were on this rant about the benefits of DDT, and now you're telling me the evils of Pfizer. I'm telling you that, first off, DDT, and there's a couple of big differences here, Brian. DDT was first come across and discovered, formulated in the late 1800s. It actually then got redone in 1939 or 37, I think it was. Anyway, the point is right before World War II. A Swiss chemist is out there piddling around with it, and he finds its insecticidal properties because it was not developed for that originally. And then it was found to be one of the most amazing insecticides that you've ever imagined, better than the stuff you're spraying out of your Raid can, at home. And it was very inexpensive and easily made. So that's why it became so good. And you're talking, and this is, I talk about it in my ag book. We lost more Marines in the South Pacific to malaria than we lost to Japanese bullets. So the United States military began using DDT. Another case to be made. DDT then had a pretty long track record. And, it had been in use since the 30s. It didn't get banned until the 70s. And it was, again, all because of activism. What's her name? Rachel Carson in Silent Spring, the book. So using that example, this COVID vaccine, which is really not,
it's not a vaccine. It's experimental gene therapy.
Experimental gene therapy was tossed together in fast fashion to respond to a media perpetuated and politically perpetuated crises that, the truth is, didn't have almost any deadly effect, any fatal effect on anyone that was healthy or young, right? It was the children, people your age, my age. If you were morbidly obese, had diabetes, and 3 other contributing causes to death, or you're quite old. So anyway, and you're not allowed to say that because the group that is the COVID crusaders. But I guess my point is, I can question the Pfizer thing all day long because I can follow the money. You can't do that with DDT. In fact, was it large chemicals that made it? Yes. I'm sorry, chemical companies. Yeah, the Ciba Geigys of the world back in the day, if you're old enough to even remember some of these companies. But it was so cheap, it was not very profitable. In fact, when DDT was banned in the United States, the chemical companies here weren't that upset because they didn't hardly make anything manufacturing it anyhow, right? It's kind of like it had moved on. You can't say that about the Pfizer vaccine, which is proprietary just to them, right? It's not, and also it was thrown together in about 3 months, whereas the DDT thing had a track record going back to the 1800s. I would say another thing. You can't tell me that Pfizer's drug has saved 500 million lives in the third world the way the DDT did, according to the National Academy of Sciences. You know that, Brian, there's an interesting stat. We used to lose some years in the American Southeast, and you're talking going back to the 40s, 30s, 50s. Remember, the American Southeast was not the new South like it is now. It was damn poor, right? I mean, all the and we still have the poverty levels of the Mississippis and the Alabamas and, you know, Georgia, West Virginia, et cetera, the Southeast. But it was worse back then. We used to lose some years, 1 million people would die of malaria in the United States. After World War II, the government embarked on a huge DDT mosquito eradication plan. By 1952, there were 3 cases of malaria in the whole United States of America. So going from like losing 1 million Americans to malaria to 3 cases in the whole country. So I can make that case about DDT. I can't do that for the Pfizer thing because, as you said, it's not even really a vaccine. It was rushed, to say the least, and it was politically motivated, and it was obviously pushed through a regulatory process that never would stand up to scrutiny if it was truly the science. So anyway.
Yeah, my doctor friends tell me that aspirin, like there's no way that aspirin would be approved as a drug today during the current, you know, under the current FDA guidelines, that we couldn't have aspirin because nobody can tell you how it works. And I asked him, I said, Jeff, isn't that true for pretty much most medicines? And he goes, well, yeah, we really don't know how they work. We just kind of know mostly what they do most of the time. That's kind of a little bit scary. Maybe it's a little bit frightening to figure out, you know, to see maybe these scientists don't really know what they think they know. And
well, let me tell you, Brian, go ahead.
You said something. You said something about following the money, about, you know, with the research, with the Pfizer thing, and, you know, like to kind of get away from COVID, that follow the money, I think, is really applicable if we're going to talk about like the great sugar lie. And I think to some extent, I think the follow the money, that to me says that there's science, quote, science and research being bought. And I wonder, you know, just like they're saying, oh, the, you know, COVID vaccine is safe, this is safe, this is safe. Well, who says it's safe? Your study that's paid for by your company said it was safe. Where's the independent verification? Where's it? It's really fishy that, you know, trust us, we say it's safe because our research says it's safe, but if it's not, you can't ever sue us because we're legally protected from liability.
Yeah, and Brian, you're missing out on the other part of it. If you then imagine, and okay, maybe your listeners are not old enough to remember this, you know, like Jim Jones, the Guyana tragedy, where he took 1,000 or so of his devout cult followers to a third world country, and then they got them all to commit mass suicide. And you look back and say, oh, those people are crazy. How would anybody believe that? And you can just hear that. You can hear the afterthought now. Well, they were drinking that's where drinking. By the way, dear listener, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, because Brian's nodding his head, he does. Google, maybe don't use Google, use a different search engine that might actually not filter what you're allowed to see. Jim Jones, Guyana tragedy, drink a Kool-Aid. That's where it all came from. And so when some of us that are more skeptical, that are more well-read, that have this thing called critical thinking capacity, started looking at this COVID thing and said, good God, I've seen this before. And it becomes this thing that, and I read an article, and it was pretty in-depth about the psychology of humans. And it's a tribal thing. It is very much a tribal thing. It's better to be in the group for survival purposes than to go against the group and then be outcast because you get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, okay? So it's better just to go along with the group. And who is the group led by? Is it the smartest scientist? Generally not. It's the person that can command an audience, who might be an alpha male or an alpha female, who can speak articulately, and who also is not against doing whatever it takes to be the leader. And that might be lie, deceit, be deceitful, whatever those things are. And if you start looking at the humans as a tribe, and looking at us being out there, and it's us, a fire, and a saber-toothed tiger out there in the wilderness, the point is the average human would rather be in the group and wrong than be outcast from the group and be right. It takes a lot of balls and backbone and fortitude and I mean and thick skin, to say the least, to go against the narrative. And that is exactly what you got to do. So when you start following this money, Brian, I know this is an agricultural podcast, but it doesn't matter. You know, I've used the DDT thing. It took balls and backbone for me to stand up to you on your podcast that you invited me on to tell you I disagree with you about DDT. And I believe that some of those stats that you actually referenced about the bald eagle are actually overstated by cause groups. And the thing is, that's what does not happen. There's no disagreement because I'm terrified of being outcast. I'd rather be in the group. And you know what? The whole COVID thing or GMOs or climate crisis, I can bring up any one of these that have a tinge of science and say, it's like the worst element of us being at grade school. Imagine you and I are at the grade school on the playground and the bully's picking on you because you're bald and have a beard and you smell like cow shit. And so I think it's funny to go ahead and jeer you also. And then 7 other people that are not as tough. They're kind of weak. Well, are they going to come over and stick up for the kid that smells like cow crap and is bald and has a beard?
No.
They're going to jump in on the jeers. That is exactly what has happened. So when you talk about whether it's the science, I cringe anymore now when I don't even cringe. I did at first. Now it's more like, oh God, this again. The science, you're a denier. When that becomes this thing, you can just imagine you're on that playground and imagine that I'm the kid that smells like cow shit. But it's because I said, no, I'm questioning this. I disagree with Pope Fauci, or I don't know that you're right about this genetically modified organism. Or I'll tell you what, DDT had a lot of positive attributes globally in terms of its benefit. It takes a lot of balls and backbone to be that person. And there's not a lot of people on that playground that come over and say, I want to see things from that perspective. So that's what you're talking about. And so to pretend that scientists and follow the science are, first off, we'll get to the money part, but first off, to pretend that they're not humans is a big, huge flaw. And I started saying this way back with the COVID craziness. And I said, these doctors are just really highly educated practitioners. They don't get taught critical thinking. They get taught when a person comes into the hospital and they've got an infection on their foot. Here's what you do. They're not usually out there on the front edge of, hey, here's this really crazy idea, this critical thinking thing. No, they're just essentially really 7 years of highly practiced practicing. That's what they do. So when it says then, and I haven't gotten into the money part, but I've talked a lot. You're the one supposed to be talking all the time.
No, I generally don't talk a whole lot. I just try to ask a few questions and let it run. So yeah, following the money.
Are we still getting along even though I disagree with you?
Oh man, you can disagree with me all you want. Like I had a really great episode last summer with Don Schiffel being the head of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And let's just say that we don't see eye to eye on much at all. And that
I think that they might be the most useless organization on the planet in terms of what they get paid and what they allegedly do with the money they get paid. And that's a bigger symptom of the checkoff programs, which some of them are very effective. The pork is the best checkoff program I have ever worked with, and I've worked with them a whole bunch. Dairy and beef, arguably the 2 worst and biggest bureaucratic wastes of money going.
Yeah, and follow the money. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole, like follow the money where your checkoff dollars go and what they actually do and try to get some answers from those people. It's a scam. To me, I see the beef checkoff as a scam in order to line the pockets of the big packers and the few feeders that have the sweetheart deals.
You're also forgetting the number of employees. Checkoff programs like beef and dairy become little governments of themselves.
Yes.
Once you get hired, you never, ever get fired. The money rolls in just like taxation every day. And the people that are giving you their money have no choice but to give you the money. And then they love to say, yeah, but you have a voice in this. We appointed this rancher out here to be on our board. Okay, so what that really means is They take them to Denver once a year, buy them a steak dinner and ply them with drinks and say, look at what our beef program is doing for you. We're beef checkoff. And they say, yeah, great. Give me another drink. Anyway, story for another day. Waste of money. I would do everything I could if I were a beef producer to check out of the checkoff. And in fact, I did. When I was a 13-year beef producer, I sold all my stuff privately.
And that's the move that I'm going to. Like, I think that there's so much wrong with the beef markets and the commodity markets as they exist. And let's face it, they're basically too big to fail. I don't think the government is going to come in and break up the big four packers or mandate that they divest to increase competition in the marketplace. That's never happening, right? JBS, Cargill.
Well, no, the government just threw a bunch of money at what was supposed to then be grants to create small scale packers and processors.
Well, those are just going to be plants that the big guys can come up and buy at 10 cents on the dollar in the next 10 years when they create another black swan event down the line to manipulate the price of beef. Like,
I don't disagree. And there's another part of it. I had somebody on here that was on my podcast that's a huge, and they look at meat markets all day, and the amount of money that was going to be tossed at this, it would have added like 3% of capacity or some ungodly amount of small. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean is what I'm saying. Hey, let's go back to the bigger thing there about the money.
Okay.
That's what you're talking about. And I gave the example of the cave people, the tribe. They'd rather just go along with the group and be wrong versus being outcast where you might get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I think the better people understand my illustration or hear it, it might make sense than about a whole bunch of stuff. And then you even have to do some soul searching. How many times have you been wrong and you've been jeering the person that actually went against convention, and only because it was easier for you to go along with the group? And it becomes very much like bullying and group bullying and all that. So anyway, don't think for a second that those scientists, now we're talking about just someone that has maybe a master's degree or a PhD in whatever, biology, chemistry, name it, and then gets employed probably by a corporation, maybe by a university. And then to stay employed, you've got to do some research, let's say. But this research you're being paid to do is being paid for by someone or by some company or by some group or by some grant that the politics of the moment are then going to say, well, we got you this grant so you can hang around in your lab with your white coat on and go on CNN and tell everybody that you're a scientist. But by God, you're going to make sure you find this. And everybody says, oh, that no one would ever do that. I'm like, are you stupid or naive? Follow the money. I get people hard time me. Oh, well, you only go and speak to those ag corporations because they pay you and you tell them what they want to hear. I'm like, I just told you that I think the NCBA is the biggest ripoff and it should be disbanded. I'm not a sellout. I speak with conviction about the things that I know based on my research and my experience and my knowledge. But the point is, I also know I work for other people's money. So if I am speaking at a chemical company, I'm not going to get up there and spend 60 minutes on stage telling them all that chemicals, the chemicals they make are, evil. I don't necessarily believe that anyhow, but I'm in a pretty good situation. I say what I think, and I understand that I work for other people's money, but I have never let it get to where I can't say no to something. If you're a scientist, you don't run your own business and you go to work for this thing and they tell you, here's what science we're going to work on, you're probably going to make sure that this is what you do. And that, don't think for a second. And then the other part of it about being terrified. So follow the money. Yes, everybody does what's in their economic best interest. Usually that's just Econ 101. You do what's in your economic best interest, self-interest. And then the other part of it is the group thing. If 11 scientists say this, and you're the 12th one out here saying, no, you know what? I conducted a completely different battery of tests and experiments, and I found the absolute opposite of what you're saying. And then it becomes a political thing. And then it becomes, what are you? Some kind of a, right winger? You're a Nazi? You're this or that? So that's where then groupthink happens in the scientific community. Not to mention, if it makes money for you to perpetuate, well, 11 scientists said this, only a lunatic would ever disagree with the findings. We at Pfizer know, we know what the good science is, so buy our stuff. And only a lunatic would disagree and ever think that Pfizer's medicine might somehow have a side effect. I guess what I'm saying is it's the money, and it's also the human side of it, because humans are still just humans. They don't want to be cast away from the fire. They don't want to be not part of the group unless they gotta be really strong person to go against the group.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And, going back to your previous example of getting middle school, get bullied on a schoolyard. I was that kid. Like I was the kid that I wasn't afraid to speak up when something wasn't right.
Yep.
But I was also usually the one getting beat on. I was usually one of the first ones to speak up in class, when a teacher wanted an answer. And, I probably got beat on a bunch for that. So I kind of know what it's like to be the outcast and be the brunt of bullying or abuse. And maybe that's given me some pretty thick skin, because I've never really had that strong burning desire to bend my morals or bend how I feel about the world to comply with a larger groupthink, to be a part of a group. I've always felt like I'll find my tribe instead of trying to compromise or change who I am to fit into someone else's. Does that make sense?
It makes sense completely. So that's what I'm just telling you. It takes a lot of balls and backbone to not just join in the jeering and the ridiculing section. Go on. I mean, like I said, the playground. Take the playground to Twitter. It's the same thing. I have people in ag. I have alleged ag personalities that ganged up on me, and then what they go and get their toadies to then ridicule me. Which I'm like, what, you think typing some shit on Twitter, like it's like you know what? You wouldn't say that if I was standing here. Oh no, we're fighting. I'm like, I'm just telling you that if I was standing there face to face, you wouldn't say that. Keyboard warrior, you can do that. So I see it all the time. But again, we can go back to all this whole thing. Take the ag example of GMOs, take the ag example of insecticide like DDT, take the ag example of climate crisis. When you so much as question it, then nobody wants to go against the grain. And then when you figure it's multiple things, Brian, being concocted. Okay. You've got an entire industry. Let's just go with the climate crisis. You've got a whole bunch of people that are going to make a bunch of money, and I mean boatloads of money, whether it's getting a contract from the government for, this new thing, stimulus, what is it, the Green New Deal or whatever the hell they call it, the Inflation Reduction Act, which a bunch of it is just ladled on top of more ladles full of money, which is my money and your money being thrown at green energy. If you're going to make boatloads of money with solar farm development and wind power and all this kind of thing, you're all for it. And then, of course, you make sure you find some scientists that say, oh, God, climate crisis. And the claims they make have become increasingly ludicrous. But it just shows that once you keep establishing the layer of bullshit, you can get more ludicrous on top of ludicrous. We have now elected politicians, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last year, saying that we probably have 12 more years. Like Earth is going to end in 12 years. They start making these out. I mean, it's outlandish. And it somehow isn't met with this like the way an outlandish statement should be met with. And so you start hearing this again and again and again. If your financial incentive is to perpetuate this, it becomes then, let's come up with even more big and shock, more fear. And so it's not questioned. It's not derided as the outlandish statement that it is. And then it becomes the new normal, which is a thing we had to hear a lot about the last 3 years.
Normal is just a setting on a dryer anyway.
Right.
And what do you?
Normal is just a setting on a dryer. And when people say it's not fair, I say fair is a place where they award blue ribbons to pigs and you buy cotton candy. Let's not ever talk about fair as it pertains to anything, because fair is a place where they give blue ribbons to pigs.
I like that better than mine. I've always said life is not required to be fair, but I think I like yours better. So I know we're kind of short on time today. So let's circle back.
You keep saying that we're going to talk for an hour. Good God. How much more time do you think these people want to hear from Damian Mason?
I don't know. They'll probably listen almost every minute that we record. So let's talk about, we're talking about following the money and Inflation Reduction Act pumping, I don't know what, another $1.8 trillion spending bill that they just passed last week.
Well, those are two separate things. 1.7, 1.8 trillion was just new spending that was all just completely full of pork. The Inflation Reduction Act was about $1 trillion before that, just a few months ago, of which I think a little more than half of it was all tied to Green New Deal. Again, solar and wind and all manner of just giveaway. And then, the General Motors got a whole bunch of incentive out of it. So it's government motors once again. So it's tragic, to be honest with you, because it creates outcomes that are not anywhere close to economically justified, I should say. They are justified because you're chasing the money, but it was not from a organic reason. It was from a government tossing money at it. So then it becomes, I can go and buy an electric car now because I get $15,000 of tax credit for doing so. Well, would you have ever bought an electric car before? No. You even want an electric car? Well, no, but I'm getting 50, so it becomes distortions, if you will.
Well, government subsidies are distortions in every market that they're in, including crop subsidies.
There's no question. You try and explain to people that not enough old people or not enough people have a historical perspective, period, and then take our own business. There was a thing just until 20 years ago, not even, less than 20 years ago, called LDP. My brother works for U.S. Department of Agriculture. I said, I bought my first farm in the year 2000. I said, what the hell is this LDP? He says, loan deficiency payment. I said, so what's it mean? He's like, well, we're giving you a loan because there's deficiencies in the crop market. I said, so what's that mean? Like, well, if corn is selling for $1.86, we're going to give you the difference between $1.86 and $2.22. I said, what's that mean? He's like, well, we think, to be profitable, you may be $2.22. I said, oh, so it's a price floor. It's a price floor. It's just giving money away. It's a price floor. Anybody that's taken economics, at least by the second or third class or 200 level, price floors and price ceilings do not work. They attempt to circumvent. They work in that they give away a bunch of money or create distortions, but they don't work in that true economic sense because there's attempts at circumventing the laws of supply and demand, simply.
Okay.
And so minimum wage, you tell people, all right, let's talk about minimum wage. Minimum wage or loan deficiency payment or rent control in New York City. Those would be three things that are all price floors or price ceilings, correct? So what they're saying is you can never pay more than this. You can never pay less than this. All right. Minimum wage law. I always get my liberal friends worked up when I say, hey, you guys want a minimum wage increase? Yes, it needs to be $15. I said, hell, you know what? That doesn't seem generous enough. If we're going to just arbitrarily pick a number, which is what minimum wage does, because it's not tied to true forces of supply and demand. I said, if $15, what would, and they said, it just would feel good because these poor people. I said, hey, if $15 makes you feel good, let's feel 10 times better. Let's make minimum wage $150 an hour. Huh? Well, it's 10 times as much. It'll make you feel 10 times better. Well, you're being ridiculous. I said, and so are you. Because if the marketplace has determined, I own a dry cleaners and I start offering $5 an hour, nobody will show up and press my shirts. I offer $7, nobody will show up. And finally at $8.50, I get somebody will come in there and press the shirts. By God, I just found what the marketplace demand is. That's how the marketplace should work. To arbitrarily just come up with some minimum wage law. And I said, so if you're going to make $15, let's do 10 times that 150. Well, then what would happen? I said, well, then Damian, instead of charging $8,000 to go out and do a speech, I'm going to charge 100 times more than that because I have to. Because the point is, if you're telling me that everything's going to be 100 times more, 100 times better, I'm going to charge 100 times more also. So I'm going to just, and you use that example like, well, no. I said, okay, so you think that we should bring up those people, but nothing else is going to go up from there. Because now the dry cleaner is going to say, well, wait a minute, at $15 when I had somebody that was doing it for $8. Crap, I'm going to have to charge twice as much for everything that person touches. So they don't understand that. Price floors is what a minimum wage is, and that's what a loan deficiency payment did. It said you'll never make less than, call it, $2.25 for a bushel of corn. And I don't know the exact numbers. I'm pretty close going back historically on ag economics. And so I'm sure someone right now that was in all the LDP programs in Iowa is going to say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. It was $2.21. Okay, whatever the number is, it was a price floor. It's very similar. It's an exact comparison to minimum wage in that it's attempting to circumvent what the real price in the market for something would be. A price ceiling would be like the rent controls in New York City. They say, you know what? Rent's too high, so you can't charge more than $1,000 a month for this apartment or whatever it should be, $2,000 a month for this apartment. And the reality is someone would pay $4,000. And so what happens? All sorts of things happen. You start sleeping with the landlord. You pay under the table. You do all kinds of things to circumvent the distortion of a price ceiling.
Yeah, for sure. And this commodity programs, like they exert a similar pressure on land price.
You could argue that they prop it up.
Yeah.
My farm ground in Indiana that I own is worth a lot of money because I can rent it. In this case, I rent my farm ground to a dairy operation. He has alfalfa and corn on my fields that he then feeds to his cattle.
Okay, you can rent that out. But here's the question. And we're talking about business and economics and agriculture. I'm going to take the standpoint and the viewpoint that there's almost nowhere you can go in this country and buy land and make it cash flow with any sort of agriculture operation.
That's probably true. And I think that's been that way. Smile. I'm taking a picture of you and I for social media while we're doing this, dear listener. I've heard that. And I will say that I have been hearing that since sitting at the dinner table sometime in the 70s. So to pretend that that is a new phenomenon would be inaccurate and also historically unastute. It's been that way for a long, long time. So, and you know what? That is news to a lot of people. Friend of mine, Purdue roommate, year or two ago, before this most recent run up in farmland values, said something. I said, hey, there's a chunk of ground. I said, I'm okay, but I might be half. Would you want to go halvesies? And then he said, yeah, now if I put down like 5%, then will that flow? And I said, well, first off, you can't put down 5% on farm ground. You got to put down like 35%. Huh? I said, this is not like a house in the suburbs that you're going to live in with your kids. I mean, I said, you're going to put down like 35%. And even then you'll still have to probably kick in some each month or each year because the cash rent isn't going to quite cover it. So you mean to tell me the cash rent won't cover even 65%? I said, probably not. Been that way for a long time, Brian. I'm not sure where you're going with that, other than to say, if you thought that was something that's only happening right now, land prices are obviously very high. My part of the world looks like we're up 30% just year over year. I could
so the direction to go with that is land access. Okay, so demographically speaking, average age of farmers and ranchers in America now
60,
which has only gone up for the last 10 years, right?
Forever. It's probably been going up forever, but
up and up and up and up and up.
Yep.
People aren't living any longer. Land cost keeps going up and up and up, and it's so far detached from the value of production that how do we get the next generation involved in agriculture economically?
I'm not sure that it's detached. the words you just said were detached economically, or detached from
decoupled. The production value is decoupled from the purchase price. And
not necessarily true. I tune into, because my alma mater, I tune into Purdue Department of Agricultural Economics puts out webinars. I try to watch them to keep my head sharp about things that maybe I'm not as on. They were saying in their June webinar, now granted, we're recording this at December. So 6 months ago, they said this looks like the biggest numbers on net income that we have seen since the mid-late 70s, which was in, I know you're out there in cow country and in grasslands, but my part of the world where it's, corn and soybeans predominantly, they compared this year, 2022, to the 70s, which were the golden era, right? For a while, one of our big super cycles. And so when you said it's decoupled, it's not necessarily decoupled at all. 2022, we saw record farm income. Net farm income is at an absolute record, up like 18 or 14% year over year. And last year was one of the fourth biggest net farm incomes. Granted, we have inflation, but also the farms made money. So if farm ground is selling for a lot of money, and it's because farmers and ranchers made a bunch of money, farmers more than ranchers, I know, because beef wasn't quite as good. So you'd have a hard time saying it's decoupled. And then if you're a pure investor right now, you'd say, okay, stuff in my part of Indiana selling for $12,000 to $14,000 an acre, but if it rents for $350, you can run the math. Let's see, $350 just for the fun of it, we'll take it on to $14,000, $350 divided by 14,000. It gives you a 2.5% return if it's cash on cash. That's not counting some property taxes you're going to pay on it. You'd say 2.5% return. Who would invest their money on 2.5% return? Well, right now you're getting negative 19 in the stock market. Your CDs are probably about 0.5%. And then there's this idea that farmland has always been acceptable to make a low return, but it gives you a return every year. And it also is something you can go out and touch. You can feel it. It's tangible. And it supposedly has got upside. Now, some of us that lived through the 70s and more importantly, the 80s know that farmland does not always go up. I saw it go down by 60 to 75%, 60 to 70% for sure in the 1980s.
You think we're heading to see another one of those early 80s type corrections again in our agricultural land price as we move out of this, and as we move deeper into this era of hyperinflation that we're kind of seem to be getting into?
Something made me pause the other day. I filled up my Ford F-150, about 30 some gallons of gas. It was $3.13. That, because most people don't even think and connect the dots between fuel, energy, and everything agriculture, but they are, attached at the hip in many regards. So the inflationary situation, I started saying 2 years ago that we were being lied to when they told us it was transitory. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Oh,
yeah. Oh. You don't print $1.5 trillion and call it fucking transitory inflation. That's
no. So, but when I filled up with gas, I'm like, okay, these energy prices have stabilized and come down a little bit. On land, I think we saw a big run. Agricultural people, as you know, hate to pay taxes, and they love land because it's, same reason. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can pass it on to your kids, you can go out there and drive around on it. Ag people like land. I own land, and I wouldn't have to. I wouldn't have to. I own it because I went back and bought it. I didn't inherit it. I like owning my farm ground, and I would own more farm ground, but I wouldn't buy farm ground at these multiples. Do I believe, to your bigger point, is there going to be a correction? The last chunk of farm ground I bought, I guess I did buy a little bit this year, but it was just more changing an arrangement with my sister. But we're up about 100% in 4 years. So you tell me, historically, an asset class that has gone up, say, single-digit percentage each year And I know there's going to be people say, what are you talking about? In the last 20 years, it's gone up 11%. Okay, let's go further than that. Let's go back 60 years. Okay, the era of modern agriculture. But from the time we invented the John Deere 4020 on, okay, let's call that the more modern era. So in the last 60 years, the asset class of farm ground has gone up, mid single digits to high single digits, probably. At best, it's gone up 7 to 10%, whatever. That's not 100% in 4 years. So would it be healthy for it to have a correction? Probably would. Do we need to see a washout? Do we need a blood in the streets out here in rural America? Well, God, I hope not. Like I said, we saw from 1981 to about 83, 84, 80 to 83, 84, we did see a 50 to 65, 70% loss of value on farm ground and assets. The story I always tell people is, I'm not going to carry on about walking uphill to school in the snow and all that. I'm just going to tell you this. I know that in the 80s, there were some agricultural assets that were so underwater, the bank wouldn't even repossess them. It was easier for them to not repossess the asset because it was worse for them to put it back on their books than to just let it go. That's a true story. Are we going to see that? I don't see that happening. Interest rates have doubled. That's the other thing, Brian. A lot of people get wrong and say, oh, interest went from 3% to 6%, went up 3%. No, it went up. It went up 100%. It went up 100% because going from 3 to 6 is a doubling. The rate is 6%, but it didn't go up 3%, it went up 100%. So when you say, okay, when you double the cost of something, if I doubled the cost of my F-150, if I doubled the cost of this pin, it should have an impact on demand, right? I doubled the price of it. So borrowed money, if you look at it as the product that it is, meaning it's a product, if I doubled the cost of borrowed money, there should be less demand for it, which means after these cash buyers get through their mattresses and what they've been sitting on cash, you would think that there could be, I personally, and everybody's like, oh, well, you're not the real estate expert. Well, I've called a bunch of them before. I called a 30% deduct from the last high, and I was almost to the penny right from 2011, 12, 13. I said, we're going to go down about 25 to 30%. We need to. I could see that. I could see a 25 to 30% deduct, and I could see it being almost healthy to do so. First off, borrowed money is going to be one of the reasons. If other asset classes begin giving a return, when my neighbors out here in suburban Phoenix start asking me about farm ground, it tells me that we're at a peak. when the doctors in Scottsdale, Arizona want to know whether they should buy farm ground, I'm like, oh no, that's time to sell. So what if we did go back 25%? We're talking about giving back 1 year's appreciation. In my part of the world, in the Corn Belt, we're up about 30%. So let's say we did a deduct of 30%, and we did that in the next 2 years. That means we'd take 2 years to give away what we went up in 1 year. Would that be the end of the world? Well, only if you were 100% leveraged at the highest price when you bought it all. And most farm owners aren't. Most farm owners usually accumulate as they go along and have a pretty good equity position.
Okay. So where do we go from here? So moving forward in the future, like I think it's going to be less affordable for individuals to be able to afford to purchase land to start an agricultural operation. And because of, how high land prices are, we're seeing more, let's say corporate ownership or group ownership or absentee ownership of these farming and ranching operations. And the big danger that happens to me is, we talked earlier about how almost every corporation is a for-profit corporation. They're designed to return profit to their shareholders. And that's what they do at expense of everything else: animals, people, and environment. So as land gets too expensive for individuals to afford, we get more and more corporate and detached ownership from our agricultural lands. And before we started recording, Damian, you asked me about my ranch. I went through it. And just for the listeners that weren't here or haven't heard it before, so about 2/3 of the ranch belongs to my family partnership, and I pay a lease on, and I own the other third. And for me, this is less of a problem. But as we would move forward into the future, I have the benefit of being ownership interest and management and labor. So if there's something wrong on the ranch, I have to look at it through the lens of being all three of those people, from management, from labor, and from ownership. Management is, can we do it? Ownership is, does this fit into my long-term vision of it? And labor is the guy actually going out and doing the work. So if I want to accomplish an overall larger ecological goal over a long term, I'm not beholden to shareholders' return of profit every year. I don't have to justify my investments in infrastructure or my investments in maintenance to anybody else but me. And it puts me in a position to where, I have to take care of the land and I have to pass it on. It has to, I've at least got to try to improve it, make it a little bit better while I'm here before I pass it on. And I really wonder how to recreate that incentive structure, that long-term incentive structure to make things better and to improve land when we have corporate ownership or group ownership that's detached.
If you're asking me, do I have an answer? I don't. I went back and bought farm property. I don't have to own farms. It's one of the things I do. I did it because I am a farm kid and I like the farm. I don't operate it. I rent it out. I have operated, and obviously I grew up doing it. I did make hay for a while on part of my property. That picture behind my shoulder right there was some of our curvy pasture fields I made into hay fields. If it was owned by a corporation, would the person from the corporation go out and walk their dogs and see a tile blow out like I do, and then take a picture of it and then call the excavator and say, hey, in the next couple months, can you get a guy out here? We got to fix some tile. If it was owned by XYZ Corporation, would they walk through the woods lovingly and look at the trees and talk about timber management? I don't know. Here's the reality. Georgia Pacific is in the timber management business. They are a corporation. They're pretty damn good at timber management. Weyerhaeuser is a timber management company. I guess my point is to pretend that it would be the collapse of our food system is probably catastrophically, predictively wrong. To say that there wouldn't be maybe much love or attachment, that's certainly true. If I own that dry cleaners that I just talked about, that's looking for an employee at $8 an hour, I'm going to care a lot more. I'm going to be in there a little earlier, stay a little later than if I just work for a chain of dry cleaners. That's probably true. We get nostalgic about the whole thing about, could somebody else do this? Could the young person do this? That's a real thing, but it's not new. The cost of entry for commodity production has been prohibitive for a long time. Let's do this rather than talking about, because we do a thing where we compare it to history and we're usually doing it with rose-colored lenses. Let's do it with anything else. I want to produce corn and soybeans. Okay, they're commodities. What's commodity production favor? Scale, economies of scale, size. You'd say, all right, it's going to be hard to do, but you know what? Your dad does corn and soybeans. And if you maybe get educated, work in town, have a job, and also farm on the side, maybe you could grow and all that. Okay, fine. What if I then said, hey, I want to produce asphalt shingles? What? Yeah, I want to produce asphalt shingles. Okay, it's a commodity. Owens Corning is a real big manufacturer of them. That's where why the hell would you think that you have this even entitlement to be able to produce asphalt shingles as a guy out here in rural Indiana? Don't you know that Owens Corning and 3 other companies make all the asphalt shingles in the country? And then you'd say, all right, are your asphalt shingles working on your house? Yeah. Is it keeping the rain out? Yeah. Did you overpay for those asphalt shingles? No, I went to the Home Depot and they had 4 different brands there and I bought this one. Okay. And I'm only giving that illustration because, again, most people in ag never think of it from that perspective. If you grow corn and soybeans and wheat, you are a commodity producer, just like the company that makes asphalt shingles or coal or aluminum cans or aluminum siding or anything, copper pipe, anything that is a commodity. So to say that somehow I want to just embark upon this, if I got out of college and I had my agricultural economics degree and I'm 23 years old and I've got zero money, you know what? I want to go and farm. You're like, it's so sad. That kid can't go and farm. He's got zero money, no inheritance. His parents aren't farming. He just wants to farm. He can't. That is so sad. What if you said, hey, I just graduated. I've got my industrial manufacturing degree. I'm 23. I have zero money. I want to make asphalt shingles and copper pipe. You'd be like, you dumb son of a bitch. It's like three big, huge manufacturers of that stuff globally. You're not going to compete against them. You know what? The margins are very low. It's huge capital, cost of entry, et cetera, et cetera. So I only give this illustration that nobody in our industry ever thinks of, Brian, that there's only a few commodity production businesses that you can get into as a young person with limited finance, and ag is one of them.
Okay.
You've never thought of it that way now, have you?
No, I really haven't. I really haven't. I kind of look at the agricultural commodity system and see some problems with it. And I know that it's difficult to fight. And you don't win their game by playing it. You have to play a different game.
Well, that's the other thing. Okay. And again, I'm an ag guy. So I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm telling our ag people, think from a different perspective. I've had to hear this my whole life. I'm 53 years old. I've had to hear it my whole life. I didn't go back and farm. There was no farm for me to go to. I'm one of 9 kids. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. There's no inheritance. We didn't barely have anything to begin with. My dad was basically a sharecropper. So there's like 85 tillable acres, some woods, some rough ground, and a very labor-intensive mid-sized dairy facility. There was not enough money for my parents, let alone my brother who decided to go and farm. So this thing of, oh, well, Damian wanted to go and farm after college and he just couldn't. How tragic. That's just so sad. We need to change this whole thing. I'm like, that's not true. USDA has all kinds of beginning farmer programs. Again, does the USDA have a beginning asphalt shingle manufacturing program where I can be a penniless 22-year-old kid and go into their office and they'll say, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you zero interest money. You go over there and you start a little factory and you start making up asphalt shingles and you compete against Owens Corning. Again, I'm not being anti-ag. I'm giving comparative perspective. Here's where you can make out. And it's more of an option now than has ever been. This idea that they want to go and farm, commodity production has always, from an agricultural economics history, gotten back to where the revenue equals the cost of production, period. It's a break-even endeavor. That's why we have the USDA. Essentially, if you have any historical perspective, we've had lots of years where you produce the crops at break even and your net profit was your USDA payments. That's been the case many, many years over the last 50 years that I've been paying attention. But more than ever, you talk about that young person that wants to get into this business. And again, I would say this to please take this the right way. There's lots of young people that get in on grandpa's assets. I'm not being mean, but based on your story, I didn't get into production ag because I had no assets given to me. So let's not pretend that this is the only thing. What if you said, I want to start a plumbing contractor business? Well, your dad and mom don't have a plumbing contractor business. So you're going to start with you and a bucket of tools. And then you're going to buy a truck. And then you're going to buy a second truck. And you're going to hire another guy, et cetera, et cetera. You say, well, you can't do that in ag. Well, actually, you can. Now more than ever. We have a consumer base that is more accustomed and comfortable buying direct from the farm than has ever been. And I'm not talking about you have to set up a roadside stand. We have internet commerce for food that is more acceptable now than it has ever been. The pandemic made it more so. It was already pretty damn popular and acceptable. Starting with this whole shutdown, you can go on your website and order, boom, whatever. So the answer is niche. And if you'll just, and I hope that my ag people understand my point there. If you'll compare it to, I want to get into manufacturing asphalt shingles, I want to get into making commodity grade corn and soybeans. Now it's a more like comparison. Nobody in their right mind would say, yeah, you make shingles. Well, it's the same thing. But you know what? What if I say, I'm going to start a company and I manufacture this niche type of environmentally friendly, very ecologically oriented, regenerative, naturally produced roofing system. And I'm going to only sell it online to people that are trying to live off the grid and in a ecologically friendly way. Oh, you mean you have a niche? You have a product that Owens Corning doesn't even want to fool with. Their factories don't even know how to make that stuff. That's the same thing with ag. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a consumer base, and we see it. And we see also to some point, Brian, you know, grass-fed, small brand was a niche since you're in the beef business. And then like Nyman Ranch said, yeah, well, let's go ahead and do the same thing, and we'll just brand it that way through all the Whole Foods 4,200 stores. Oh, now that niche became almost commodity. Well, that's what happens. Eventually, when niches get too big and too profitable, then they become commoditized. Profits go down because all that big manufacturers, all that big retailers know how to do is sell stuff cheaper. And so if you want to be in ag production, you have to be in a niche, there's no question, or you have to come into it with some sort of capital in your background.
Yeah. And finding that niche, I think, is, you know, it can be your unfair advantage. It can be what makes your business work. But back to my point, like trying to get into the conventional commodity game with corn, soybeans, cotton, wheat, whatever, that's not really a viable economic prospect, I don't feel. But getting into a niche, like growing sunflowers, growing cover crops, growing all natural pasture finished grass fed beef, you know, these are niches that people need to think about starting to explore that can be done on a much smaller acreage to generate, you know, an adequate living versus the almost non-existent margins in the commodity business.
So when, and I, again, I'm as pro agriculture as any human you'll ever meet. I also am pro business and I understand business. Again, more of like the left leaning media loves to cover this. They rolled out, they trotted out when there's not COVID or climate crisis, paranoia and fear to push, then they had to roll out this one. And you'll see these stories pretty regularly. NPR, I think it was about 4 years ago. Go and profile this nice old man and woman. I don't know if they're nice or not, but they're old and they're in Wisconsin. They're 80 years old and they got 36 cows in a tie stall barn. And I saw the pictures. And of course, the cows are just coated with shit because it's an antiquated farming operation, an antiquated milking operation. The cows are not being well cared for. They're in tie stalls, for God's sakes. So all the animal do-gooders sort of forgot that they're supposed to be against this because at modern dairy operations, they've got hoof trimmers. They've got hoof baths where they go through to make sure they don't get hairy warts. They've got a nutritionist on staff. They have a veterinarian on staff. They have air movement systems. They have fresh water every 100 feet. Amazing. But the NPR story showed these dirty cows in this tie stall barn in the basement of a barn that was built in the probably late 1800s, early 1900s. And they talked about how awful it was that Mr. and Mrs. Farmer in central Wisconsin couldn't make it because big farming, big corporate agriculture was putting them out of business. They've been milking 36 cows there since the 1950s, gosh darn it. And that's terrible. They can't make it. If you are still doing things the way you did in 1950, you should be out of business, period. And so this whole story is that, oh, they can't make it being a small farmer. Well, maybe they could make it as a small farmer if A, they took better care of their cows, B, updated facilities just a little bit, spent some money since 1960 till today. If you don't upgrade your facilities for 60 years, you might have a problem. And then more importantly, find a niche. They could have upgraded facilities, take better care of the cows, spend a little money on improvements along the way, and then decided, hey, you know what? There's probably not a lot of room for us. We're not as efficient. We don't make as much milk per cow. We got all kinds of other issues. Let's just do this. Let's make it so that we're selling raw milk or unhomogenized, straight from the farm, bottled in glass milk, whatever. And people say, oh, Damian, that sounds easy for you. What about? I'm tired of the excuses. The point is, I'm from Indiana. We used to manufacture like 100 different brands of automobiles at the turn of the century in the state of Indiana. Okay. The Stutz car company don't exist anymore. It's not because of somebody being evil. It's called evolution.
Not everybody gets to make it, I suppose. And not every idea is good.
Well, I started out, as I told you, when you asked me for my elevator speech, and I told you that I don't like to talk on elevators. That was a political comedian when I quit corporate America. If I had failed, do you think there would just be this whole outpouring of emotion and, oh, poor Damian, he tried to make it in political comedy. Maybe we need more USDA programs for young, budding political comedians. Nope, it was sink or swim. And so that's the way it is with a lot of businesses. And so I'm being very frank. And also, I'm an ag guy. This idea that you can't make it as a young farmer is not necessarily true. But why is it that we have this thing that should be a path to entry without any struggle or no failure rate? Nobody thought that about me when I was 25. That stupid idiot went and quit a good corporate job to try and be a political comedian. Now I'll tell you the other part about keeping up, modernizing, evolving. My political comedy act, Brian, was very unique. It was very special. I dressed up as Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton was the president of the United States. So my political comedy act involved me dressing up as Bill Clinton with makeup and wig and hair and all that stuff and a suit. And I did a political comedy act in the persona of Bill Clinton. So here it is, the year 2022. Huh?
He was such an easy target.
Yeah. So here it is, the year 2022. Bill Clinton has not been in office since the year 2000. What if I told you, Damian Porter, what if NPR came out and did a story and said, here's this poor man. He's been a political comedian since 1994, and big corporate comedians are putting him out of business. Here's poor Damian. He still delivers the same act that he did in 1994 when he quit corporate America, where he dresses up as Bill Clinton and gets up and does some yucks about Monica Lewinsky or Hillary's calves or Newt Gingrich. You'd say, you stupid son of a bitch. Nobody wants to hear that. That's 30-year-old comedy. For God's sakes, you need to get with it. But we never do that in agriculture now, do we?
I mean, that's a good point. And I'm struggling to draw a parallel, though.
I just paralleled it for you. I told you about the two old people in Wisconsin that NPR told us we're all supposed to cry about and create a GoFundMe. They created a GoFundMe account. Their kid created a GoFundMe account, said to help out grandma and grandpa out there still in their 36 cow tie stall barn. Nobody creates a GoFundMe account for a antiquated Bill Clinton impersonator. I adjusted, I evolved, and became the next thing. They should too.
Yeah. I get that. I was hung up on like thinking about commodity corn and soybeans because I don't know why. That's just where my brain usually goes back to is trying to reconcile that.
I already gave that one to you also. I compared it to Owens Corning in the manufacturing of asphalt shingles, commodity production. Okay.
I think we got it. Yeah. Well, is there anything left we need to cover today?
I don't know. Are we still getting along?
Of course.
Yeah.
I get along with almost everybody. I mean, yeah. I get along
I don't
get along with a lot of people for 2 hours.
I don't get along with everybody, but that's okay. I guess I get people in ag. I had to block somebody a couple months ago that it was the same bullshit I heard when I was a child at Baxter's restaurant where the farmers hung out in Huntington, Indiana. See so-and-so down there, Mr. Big Farmer gonna put us out of business. I've had to hear this forever. I retaliate against it, but I do so with economic comparisons, real world examples, And then I still have to hear, well, it isn't the same thing. So if you're still hung up on that, I can't help you. But we've really just talked, you began this whole thing, and we've done everything from the evolution of this industry to the economics of this industry. And the point is, the economics right now are amazing. We had record farm income in 2022. Everybody is making money in ag, except my understanding is tree nuts, tree fruits struggle a little bit. A few livestock sectors struggled a little, specialty crop. But in general, it's never always good for everybody. And also, the niche thing that we've just discussed, you could earn a living in niche agriculture more easily today than you could have at any other time in American agriculture. You got to be a bit more of a marketer. You got to be a bit more of a promoter. That's it. Commodity production favors size and scale, and it always has.
And I think COVID has really helped a lot of small producers, a lot of diversified producers, niche producers find their markets and find their consumers.
Yeah. And like I said, it's more acceptable and accepted than it's really ever been. So that's a bonus for most everybody. So here's the biggie. I appreciate you having me on here. I'm not sure we got to everything that was on your list, but I think we got through a bunch of things that weren't on your list. So there you go, my man.
I very rarely get through everything on a list. And that's perfectly okay. My listeners they're probably used to it by now. So close us out. Let us know where we can find you on the internet and how to get a hold of you. And what was your podcast again?
The Business of Agriculture is the podcast. The Business of Agriculture. My name is Damian Mason. You can go to Damian Mason, Damian. Just type in whatever search engine you use, Damian Mason Agriculture, and I'll come up. My website, damianmason.com. I'm all over social media, particularly Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I do some stuff on Instagram, although I'm not sure that's my favorite. And I do put out my podcast every week. And then also you can check out the work we're doing over at Extreme Ag. Just type in extremeag.farm, no E on the front of it, extremeag.farm. So we're all over the place.
All right. Sounds great. And I guess with that, we'll let y'all go. Y'all have a great week. Thanks, Damian.
Thanks.